arrests. Next slide, please. Let me share a quick example of a real life scenario of a flawed use of facial recognition technology. Here's an example of a man, Mr. Robert Williams, who was wrongfully accused of a crime by law enforcement in Michigan. They used a facial recognition system to identify a suspect they believed committed a crime. Mr. Williams received a call at his office from the Detroit Police Department asking him to come to the station to be arrested, and he thought it was a prank at first. An hour later, when he arrived home, the Farming Hills, Michigan Police Department pulled up behind him, and two officers got out and arrested him in front of his family and his two daughters, his wife and his two daughters. The police would not say why he was arrested. They only showed him a piece of paper with his photo and the words written, felony warrant and larceny. It was later revealed that a facial recognition system was used that falsely identified Mr. Williams. This is just one example of how technology's misidentifying someone has led to an arrest for a crime they did not commit. The consequences of this error and the law enforcement's reliance on this technology, to say the least, has created a horrible situation for Mr. Williams, his families, and communities across our country. Next slide, please. And for my final portion of my presentation, this map shows where law enforcement agencies are using facial recognition technology around the country and how widespread its use is. Many of the facial recognition systems used do not follow what is considered ethical practices, which include transparency, explainability, accountability, equity, and oversight. And now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Chris.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, cool. So as I said, that's a great overview, Elizabeth. And to get a little bit more into the weeds around how exactly facial recognition tech works, I wanted to show this slide, which was presented to Congress, actually, during a presentation on the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. It shows how different facial recognition technologies performed on different kinds of people. And you can see that the system was, like Microsoft, the Microsoft facial recognition technology was 100% accurate on the white man, but was only 79% accurate on the darker females. And while it may seem like 79% accurate is pretty good, when that gap between how well it performs with white men and darker women, and just that overall error rate is very concerning, especially when you can take into consideration broader disparities in traditional policing. And to really highlight this, I feel like one of our fellow people here at the POSTME Coalition did some great research with Google's facial recognition system. If you could go to the next slide, please. Yes, so this is a standard sort of behind the scenes image identification of different object identification or object classification. So it takes a picture and it looks for, and it tries to identify the objects in the picture. So Google's computer vision is looking at this picture and it's saying that it has with 98% or with 68% accuracy, it sees some sort of technology. It thinks 67% accurate, there's some sort of electronic device. And how it's really doing this is it's using what's called machine learning, which is essentially machine learning is essentially about finding things that are similar to other things. You give it a bunch of pictures of things that are labeled technology, and it looks for similar patterns in this picture and says, all right, technology is in there. So then let's see what happens if we upload something else. Can you go to the next slide, Manira? So Emun uploaded a picture of a man doing the exact same thing. He's taking someone's temperature, and Google's image recognition, Google's computer vision, thought with 88% degree of confidence that there's a firearm or that there's a gun in this image. And you can imagine how that would be incredibly dangerous and incredibly problematic. And he actually did some even more experimenting. If you could go to the next slide. You can see that he simply, Emun simply took the picture and lightened up the contrast. And just by lightening up the contrast, he was able to show that Google's image recognition treated the image differently than if it was, a white hand holding a thermometer, just a hand. A black hand holding a thermometer, oh, there must be a gun. And if this seems crazy or strange to you, you have to remember that the way that machine learning works is that it's constantly changing depending on the inputs that it gets. So it's and you'll see this during the demo at the end. Every time you feed it the image, it'll spit out something that's a little bit different. And so when you combine these error rates, which are in many ways the result of the designers simply not doing a good job feeding good data into it. Like if you take facial recognition systems from China, they're really good at and from Africa, they're very good at identifying Black faces and Asian faces. It's just we're using unrepresentative data. And so this is a big problem because facial recognition has a lot of the biases. It's very easy to use facial recognition technology as a way to make racist policing. The algorithm makes racism seem objective because the racial bias has been quantified, and people say math can't be racist. So it's sort of a way to whitewash some of the biases in policing. If you could go to the next slide. In Clearview AI is like the classic example of bad actors in this space. If you have any pictures of yourself up on social media, Clearview AI has scraped those pictures and used it to train its algorithms. Yes, and there's a big reason why nobody wants to work with these people except law enforcement. Munir, do you want to talk a bit about
Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk a bit about the timeline just because there's some important dates coming up. So the ordinance is officially introduced, and on February 10th, there'll be a public hearing in a committee. There you can show your support, you can testify, and say your piece at the city council. You can also sign our petition at petition.postme.mn if you support the ban on facial recognition. Also, February 12th will be the full council vote. So just to highlight some important dates that if you care about this issue, you should know about. Awesome. So now we can jump into the Q&A. And I know Steve was having some audio problems. So Steve.
I'm on now. I think hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So thank you. Before we get into Q&A, I just wanted to thank everybody, first of all, in the coalition who's been so persistent and helpful in working on this issue over a long period of time. We really started thinking about data privacy principles many, many months ago, and this is really the first ordinance that's a reflection of those principles that the council passed over a year ago. So this is a continuation of a lot of work that we've done together. We're starting to build a really good team. So I appreciate all of your work on this panel, and especially ACLU and Restore the Fourth and everybody in the POSTME Coalition. What the ordinance is and why we're thinking about it. And I think one of the things that I think is I'm getting some feedback from people as people are starting to talk about this, which is good. They're starting to talk about it. We want to raise awareness about data issues. One of the things I'm seeing in the feedback we're getting is that people are confused about what we're actually talking about. So we're not banning cameras. That automatically scans the data captured by cameras to automatically identify faces, which is a very specific thing. When cameras are appropriate and how we should use them and how we should use that data and how we should store that data. I think there are some very good reasons to the use of software algorithms to identify faces. And the reason that we're doing that is because, as we saw, there's a significant and that if we saw any technology that fails to work a third of the time for people of color, we would need to start works. And too often in the creation of our entire approaches to public safety and outcomes that work well for some people and don't work well for people of color, that we make decisions. And I think it's time for us to say, if this does not work for everybody, it does not work. And so that's a part of the ordinance, is just to ban this very specific technology, to say this is something that the city is not going to use. We're not going to use it. We're not going to acquire it. Can trust that we're using data in a responsible way. This is not to be anti-technology. And I want to really emphasize that I think people sometimes assume that as we're passing these things, that there's kind of a Luddite impulse or an anti-technology impulse. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. The idea here is really that we know that there are sometimes very surprising things. And it's very important that we demonstrate that we can use technology responsibly and that we have a set of guardrails infringed upon so that people can trust the city to really implement privacy. So this is really about creating a set of boundaries that can help people trust. This conversation is going to continue for a long time. We intentionally wrote the ordinance so that it has a process for exceptions. So recognition that they would like to use, that they think works within our equity policies and our data privacy policies and is consistent with the city's values. And so there's a process built into the ordinance to adapt in the future as technology changes. And I think that's an important thing for people to know as well. To hear from all of you who took the time to show up tonight. Thank you.
So yeah, raise your hand. It'll have like a little icon raising hand, and then we'll just jump to you. And please don't, and also just be respectful. So yeah, it looks like some people are. Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
And 4, I know the Target Corporation in the city of Minneapolis created the safe zone in downtown Minneapolis. Target donated $1.8 million surveillance camera to the city. They contracted Paul Valentine from the UK to come and set it up. Why is this missing from the story? Because this preceded the facial recognition technology. And we know that the Minneapolis police are not honestly answering the question, how have they been already using facial recognition technology to monitor the safe zone? Because from the very beginning in 2004, when they created this program, the issue was who's going to monitor, the camera. So, of course, China developed, they innovated a incredible facial recognition technology program that says that they can scan the entire face of the world within 2 seconds. So this is dangerous. So I find it troubling that you guys are already talking about concessions and allowing people to use it in certain instances. And we know, the safe zone led to a Jim Crow program that still exists downtown that leads to prison from the streets for Black youth downtown. Like, all of this is missing from the narrative, and we need answers.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, thanks for that question. And it is worth noting that this coalition is working on a broader set of issues than just facial recognition. So what we're describing is something that is what we're passing right now. And, I think we saw some reason to move forward with this on a quicker timeline because we're seeing more vendors start to offer facial recognition as an add-on. I think, right now, MPD doesn't own any facial recognition technology. And similarly, other departments currently don't own facial recognition technology that they use. I'll just say, policing, but this doesn't just apply to police departments. And it's important to know that, that this applies to the entire city. And in fact, this conversation started getting to your question about sort of the surveillance, especially, right downtown, there were a lot of tasks and all kinds of things that would actually be things that would probably get contracted for through Public Works that about people. So this is it's valuable for it to be a citywide ordinance and to apply to the whole city enterprise. We are, I think, and in many ways the exceptions to the ordinance is actually a way of creating transparency. So recognizing that technology is going to get used, that will continue to be a model as we expand into generally and technology equipment. So I think that we're sort of creating step by step a way of being more transparent about, because it either doesn't work or it's harmful. There's technology that we should use, but we should be transparent with everybody that we're using it, and we should tell people if we're collecting data here. The public doesn't feel comfortable with equipment that we're using. Important to understand. And then there are things that this just won't ban. So as a city right now, we are banning the city from using this technology. So I see a question in the chat about banning any facial recognition technology like smart doorbells like Ring and Amazon that are being used for. And that's, I think, also important for people to know. There is an example of at least one city that has delved into that, that is banning stores, restaurants, public places law. So I think we're moving forward right now with the question about how the city is going to behave, and I think that's important because is an important question.
Thank you, Steve. So it looks like people are already kind of in the stack. So Tamburino. And just 1 minute, please. Quickly and clearly state your question, and then we'll move on. Thank you. Go ahead.
Recognition technology, Canada, I believe 9 or 11. Also, the proposal does not limit other law enforcement agencies from using facial recognition technology. It's only the Minneapolis Police Department. So the BCA, Sheriff's Department, FBI, Metro Transit, if they have a Minneapolis case, they can use FRT. So what's the point of this? This type of technology will be ubiquitous within a couple of years.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it is true that we are not able to regulate other levels of government. So when a city passes an ordinance, we pass an ordinance that applies to our city. And so yes, if and it is currently, that is who has the technology in the city is actually the county sheriff. Sheriff Stanek invested in some technology during his term. So it is true that it may potentially be used. And it is something that by passing this ordinance, we can hit the brakes on and not automatically accept it into our city. and into our city operations. I think we need to behave ethically and gathering data about people equitably.
Thank you, Steve. It looks like up next is Anton.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking my question, and thanks, Steve, for leading on this, and thanks for my understanding that similar ordinances have been implemented in other cities. I know that San Francisco is one. I think there are some other cities across the nation that have implemented similar ban on facial recognition anyway. What are some lessons that you've learned from these cities? I mean, I assume that we've kind of taken a look at those, and how are those lessons learned applied for this ordinance? That's kind of my question.
Munira, I'm happy to answer. You can also, if there's questions you want to refer to any of the other panelists, I'm also happy to let that happen. But I will say we did look at many of the ordinances around the country, and really we're looking at, I think the things that we've seen are that we need to make sure that it's clear what technology we're talking about, and it's clear. I think the insight to have an exception process so that we have something built in that can correct as technology evolves in a public and transparent way without having to rewrite the ordinance, I think was something that emerged as a best practice. Enforceability, just making sure ordinance, they actually have a private right of action built in, so that which is necessary in their context. In Minnesota, we have a little bit of a different legal structure where there's already a right to. We sort of looked at what were the things that were working and that seemed important to other cities. Or we need something that's going to be specific, transparent, and enforceable.
It looks like Joel Reyer, you're up next. You could state your question, please.
Hi. So I'm curious what the relationship between the FRT system is. I know other states submit things like driver's license and passport photos to the FBI's Dragnet system. I'm curious if we do that and if we have access to their computing or resources. Thanks.
Chris, Elizabeth, Steve, anyone want to take this?
Okay. I would really like to know the answer to that question too. So we know that this is Chris Wayland with Restore the Fourth, by the way. So there is a lot of secrecy and almost no transparency into the pipeline between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement when it comes to a lot of different kinds of surveillance technology. Some of it comes through different federal municipal programs. The one that I'm particularly interested in are using what are called fusion centers, which are these scattered throughout in post 9/11. They created these like clearing houses for not only just local law enforcement to share data with federal law enforcement, but also in some cases private industry. And I could go on and on about fusion centers at great length, because there's a great deal of data sharing and Fourth Amendment violations that I think go on with fusion centers. But what we know is that the FBI does have access to facial recognition technology. And we know that there have been efforts to use facial recognition with driver's license photos and with passport photos. And I know that in order for the reason, and I know this because I was told explicitly by the person who was taking my picture when I was getting a new Real ID, was that the reason they want you to take your glasses off is because they want to use it with facial recognition. And so we have almost no transparency into those pipelines. And this is historic. Like, they even back in the day, the FBI actually raided a police station in Florida. The FBI raided a police station because of a Freedom of Information request that took, this is related to, I want to say, stingrays, which are these devices that suck up cell tower data, because they wanted to keep that, because I think it was the ACLU that made or maybe it was the defense lawyer, made a Freedom of Information request about the tech, and the FBI wanted that data out of there so they couldn't comply with the order. So there's a lot of secrecy, and this ordinance is not going to be able to touch the FBI's ability to use facial recognition technology. But what it would do is it would prevent the departments under the jurisdiction of the city of Minneapolis from sort of interacting directly and using the data as that other, like, we can't stop the FBI, but we can stop them from just like sharing a photo with the FBI and saying, can you do facial recognition tech on this? So that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but it was a very big question.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to just quickly jump to Elizabeth Adams. I know you wanted to talk a bit about tech design.
Yeah, thanks, Manera. So the conversation has been great so far. So I just want to let everyone know I've been a technologist for the past 20 years, and I've worked on a number of technology systems. But when we're talking about facial recognition systems, a lot of times people think that the conversation starts once the product makes its way to a community, and then you can see the results on whether or not it's working. But there's a whole process that starts beforehand, and it starts with who is designing the system, who's included in those conversations. Is the conversation around the impacts to various communities where these technologies will be adopted? When we talk about Clearview AI, and we've shown the slide that basically has said that recognition technology, and that's the system that we are using in Minneapolis. And so that company has made several statements will not be explainable in terms of how they're collecting their data, why they're collecting their data, how they're modeling their data, what questions were using it in Minneapolis. So now that flawed technology has made its way into our communities, and it's being used to augment what the police officers are doing. Work. And why I'm a part of this conversation is because we need to have the conversations about why we should be adopting technology. Chris did an amazing job talking about and showing the high error rates. And for me as a Black woman, that is a problem. A higher accuracy rate for these organizations if they are going to sell to communities, and then they are the ones that are being used. So I wanted to just make sure that we also included that discussion around the particular software vendor that is used in Minneapolis. Studies that have happened around facial recognition, there are now certifying processes that are being stood up, but Clearview AI has in an ethical process. So thank you, Manera, for just giving me a moment to just kind of frame the discussion around the technology pieces of it.
No, thank you. I think that Jacob Rohrback, if you want to come and state your question.
Are we going after a technology, or are we going after a brand? Talking, let's ban the technology altogether. And while I understand privacy concerns, over the past year, there's been a huge increase in crime within Minneapolis, while at the same time, due to the stellar actions of the city council to defund the police, the whole police force, there's been a mass exodus, good cops, bad cops, whatever, over the actions of a few. So we can't even hire cops to come in and do the job of a Minneapolis cop in this area. So the question I guess the concern that I'm addressing is this technology, with Clearview obviously isn't the right choice, but what are we going to do to address the crime? It seems like we're tightening the cuffs on law enforcement, not just the cops, while we're kind of letting potential crime go in the name of social rights, in the name of social rights bandwagon.
Steve, or any of the panelists, if you want to answer that, please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks for that question. I think that, right now, this is actually something that, first of all, I think that these rights are very important. I think that the right to privacy is very important. I think this is something people care about. And one of the things that needs to happen in our city, in order for us to have this be a place where people want to work in our public safety functions, is that it needs to be trusted by the people of our city. And one of the ways that we create that trust is by creating we're not abusing power. And I think that that's really important. And so one of the way through this, the reason that our city is in a place of injustice that has built a lot of mistrust for a lot of people, and a disagreement about who to attribute that cause to. I don't think that anything that of these changes, I think it was reflective of public sentiment around public safety. And so as we try to and that can regain public consent and support, I think it's very important that we have rules in place in technologies that will double down on the inequity that has led to the mistrust in the first place. So I think for us, I think that there's a very significant need for us to establish, insist on equity, and that insist on fairness, and that insist on investing in tactics that are not going to disproportionately harm where people trust unless we get there. But that being said, we're not going after a brand. This isn't just about one brand. Most of the brands that you might think of have stopped doing business abilities associated with using their technology in a law enforcement context. So in many cases, as policymakers, it's not merely our judgment as advocates and activists, it's also the judgment of the people who might be accountable for the outcome. Really isn't making sense. And so, if Amazon and Google and Microsoft enforcement sector with this technology, we don't think it's ready for that. We don't think it would produce ethical outcomes. And then we're left with the produce even worse results in terms of their technology outputs. That should really tell us, a part of why, because I'll be honest, I didn't start off thinking a full ban made sense. I think the more we look into the technology, I think it begins, we're just in a place where it does not make sense for us to allow this technology.
Question. Do Chris or Elizabeth, do you guys want to speak to that? All right, lovely. Next person, Ginger Weil, if you want to come.
I guess I'll start by just saying I'm super in support of registering in support of it. My questions were just kind of technical reading the ordinance. Does the restriction on buying third-party access also include restricting someone from paying a third party to do the accessing and just giving you back the results? I couldn't quite tell. And also, does the ban on helping third parties develop this also include allowing their use of image compilations as well as more active assistance? In both cases, I'm hoping the answer is yes. I just couldn't clearly tell from the ordinance language. So those were my questions. And I'm really excited that we're making this step.
Thank you so much.
On the first part of the question, the answer is yes, and we explicitly rewrote it in the drafting process to include use of the data more broadly, so that to avoid exactly that situation. On the second, my assumption is yes. That would be my reading of it. But I might want to check back in before giving you a more definitive answer, because I'm not sure that we've thought very specifically about that exact scenario. So thank you for raising that. But it would certainly be my intention that the answer is yes, and I believe that it is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Chris.
As a technical matter, it's going to be difficult. The ban on deliberately training the systems is going to be tricky because the way that you train these systems is to use them. So in a sense, every time you upload a picture of a face to the internet, you're potentially helping to train some facial recognition program somewhere. So I think that the intent portion is going to be very crucial, because and otherwise, just I guess being in and it's going to have to boil down to like data policies, to making sure that like you don't put everybody's face just in a convenient public bucket for everyone. But I did kind of want to reiterate the fact that just to raise, just kind of raise awareness of it, it's using these systems and training these systems is as easy as just uploading a picture of your face to the internet. So.
Thank you, Chris. It looks like up next we have Peter Ireland. Peter, if you want to come and state your thoughts or questions. Oh, I think you're muted.
Hi there.
Hello.
So I wanted to make a comment before I ask my question. Council Member Fletcher mentioned that sort of the motivation for this facial recognition ban is that it's currently inaccurate and it's not good, and therefore it's creating inequalities, and this is why we don't want to use it. I just want to comment that no matter how accurate, proportionately utilized on marginalized communities. If we think about handguns as a technological innovation, which they serve, that handguns and their utilization, handguns are disproportionately utilized against communities. Strong, much stronger ban than, although it's inadequate. Okay, so my Ginger's question, I think I wanted more clarity on that. Using the county to run facial recognition anymore. So the county specifically, and then also other third parties in general. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It specifically names using and acquiring. So city employees would not be allowed to ask for that data or acquire that from third-party partners.
Lovely. Able to FDSG, if you want to come, state your questions and thoughts.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm David. To first comment in response to 3 prior questions that fusion centers and transfers of data to other parts of the government that aren't covered directly by this ordinance, but for that, with the intent that that data be put through facial recognition and then returned, are covered. And I'm really happy to see that language in the bill. I had 2 questions. One of them is whether the lessons learned from Portland and the reason why private use in places of public accommodation is not prohibited by the current ordinance has anything to do with constitutional issues, or whether there's some other reason that we've decided not to have a ban as extensive as the one passed in Portland. My second question is whether the rules of criminal evidence, of exclusion of criminal evidence, are strong enough, given that the way that it's phrased in the bill, we actually can't prohibit the court, which is outside the jurisdiction of the bill, from considering the evidence. We can just prevent it from being presented by the police department. But should the police department accidentally present it, or should someone else present it, there's no way that it can actually be excluded. So we don't have the whole fruit of the poison tree defense. So those are my 2 questions. One is about lessons from Portland and why we don't have private use prohibition, and the other one is about whether the rules of criminal evidence exclusion are extensive enough.
Thank you. So the private use is a thornier set of legal issues, both constitutional and at the state level. And so really making sure that under our charter, we have, like, we're operating within our power to implement something like that is something that we wanted to take a little more time with. And so we chose to separate those options so that we can pass the portion of it that we feel confident about. And then I think we'll take up that question separately around private use. So that's the short answer on that. I think there's also an interest in seeing how it goes in Portland a little bit. It's sometimes not always advantageous to be the first actors on everything and be the ones who have the precedent-setting lawsuit on everything. Our city attorney's office sometimes appreciates it when we let other cities go first. For the second question, it is correct that we can't dictate how the courts treat this data, which are done out of the city attorney's office. This applies to the city attorney's office, to prosecutors in the city attorney's office. Would not be relying on this data for our prosecutions any more than in the same way that the police will not be for investigations. So that's the short answer to that. But in case where it's being tried by the county, we cannot regulate that. If the county has some source of facial recognition data, either from a gathering or otherwise, that's not something that we're able to regulate at the municipal level. So that's something that could benefit from continued advocacy at the county and state level. And I'll just name that often is increasingly to be the laboratories of democracy that take up these issues, and that the more cities take something up. I mean, we're seeing many cities around the country that we've lifted it up to be mainstream enough that the federal government's considering it at a federal level. I think there's a kind of momentum that level that can gain some momentum, and we're kind of doing our
So I thought I'd jump to the chat a bit. I know some people don't want to actually say their questions. So that this won't prohibit any private use, so you can still use those. And then there is questions about let me see if I can find it again. Does this ordinance prevent companies like Amazon from giving access to Ring cameras?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Does this ordinance prevent companies to like MPD or ICE?
So we can't do anything about ICE.
Well,
Mhm.
to be it would prevent them from receiving like camera feed, right? I'm just trying to imagine, like they could still, like if MPD wanted to, they could probably still tap into the direct camera feed, but if they did they wouldn't be able to tap into the facial recognition components of it, unless I'm misunderstanding how Amazon Ring works.
No, that's correct, and that is a question that people have had: is can we still provide video footage if we have video from our doorbell or from our home security system? Can we still provide that to the police if we have evidence of something that happens? This bill doesn't do anything to address the use of video data except for using facial recognition software. So if Ring has video of something that's relevant to an investigation, MPD can access that and should access that. Based on a facial recognition scan, that would be banned by this ordinance.
I'm gonna jump to one more question in the chat, then I'll go back to the raised hands. Steve Kramer is asking, why are the exceptions unacceptable? I guess, why are we allowing exceptions?
That's a great question. Part of that is to make over time, the technology will improve in some acceptable. But the bigger thing is that there are different uses that have different risks or different stakes to them, right? So the ordinance, for example, is if employees have laptops and they use facial recognition to unlock their own laptops, so they can train the facial recognition software software packages now, for sort of consumer laptops. Now that is not being used to identify someone for a high stake in a way that they're not consenting to. Presumably they could turn that feature off if they weren't comfortable with it themselves, right? So where we have a component of consent, where we have a component of sort of a low particular use, then that's something that makes a lot of sense. And I see Ginger making the point that I should have led with, which is that accessibility technology is one of the things that we want to make sure in the process of doing this. And so I think there are uses that it will make sense where we're seeing people consent, where we're seeing people get a specific benefit that doesn't expose them to risk and that doesn't expose them to harm, where there can supersede municipal ordinances. There's language, and I will say we are debating whether the inclusion or whether the language is in the language I'm interested in it, because we heard from a couple advocates that they were concerned it was overbroad. But there is a clause that specifically that we as a city comply with and would use any data that they sent us and provide any data that that we're given. And so so that exception is something that was included, and that's really a way of us being transparent. Whether it was included or not, we would need to do that. It's federal law that would super. But that exception is there as a way of being transparent. That's one case where we would make an exception.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm going to jump back to the raised hands and then I'll go back to the chat. So please be Taguchi, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Please come and state your thoughts.
Hello, can you hear me? Of the Twin Cities chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. Community, because during World War II, our community was rounded up and taken to concentration camps based purely on our identity. So my question is are we at the point where there is a legitimate concern that we've talked about unintentional discrimination with this kind of technology, but could it be used for intentional discrimination to do something along the lines of the Muslim registry that we've heard some politicians talking about?
Yes, and one of the data privacy principle considerations that we really thought about, and I appreciate you raising that question because it is something we think quite a lot about and that we hear from several different immigrant communities that they feel at risk of being targeted in particular ways, is that sometimes the safest way to protect people's data is not to have it. So for the city, and this was a tension that we've wrestled with even around, there was a push for municipal ID, which is just an idea that I think is broadly supported in the city, that having a city level ID so that people, regardless of their citizenship status, could get a basic form of identification that could help them with day-to-day transactions might be, a really positive. Developing a concern around just having that data meant that if the federal government undocumented immigrants in our community and they wanted to come get that data, we would have a hard time not giving it to them. So the best way for us to protect from the city actually exposing the people who get municipal ID to that kind of scrutiny from ICE was to not have the data. Is currently classified. We couldn't overcome that concern and not initiate. That's something we'd still like to overcome. We'd like to be able to protect that data in a better way, but it's not something we're able to. Thinking about this, when you think about walking through the city, and if it were to create a record of where you go and where it spots you at every time you go in front of a camera, that record then exists someplace and is absolutely the best of intentions, and that wants to be a welcoming place for everybody. Sometimes just having the data creates a little bit of a challenge. And to get to the question in the chat, responding to state law, we're not allowed to have a short retention period. So that's really that's the thing that would need to change, and that's exactly the right kind of question. So everything that we're keeping it, who has access to it while we have it, and what kind of harm does that potentially expose people to if we have it? And so I've gotten more comfortable with surveillance cameras in the city is because they have, we keep camera footage for 14 days unless it gets flagged by an investigator for an incident. And so there's not a, that people might worry about. But as Ginger notes, a short retention period doesn't protect you from everything, right? So and who can we give access to? So I think that's a set of principles, and that right now, when we think about what kind of an intrusion, especially when we look at sort of the real-time algorithms with live cameras that are tracking people's whereabouts as they move through the city, I think there's a real risk of harm. And it would be a real...
Up next, Tria Church, if you want to come state your question.
Okay, I shouldn't be muted now. I'm okay?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hundreds of civil rights groups right now that are talking to the fact that there's beginning to be a rise in surveillance after the insurrection at the Capitol. kind of the same kind of thing that happened with the Patriot Act. And it sounds as though they have been portraying catching all these people by it's not clear enough that it's not surveillance is doing that. And people get the opinion, well, maybe, oh yeah, look at all these people they're getting. When actually most of those people were identified by other people who knew them and knew who they were. It wasn't huge surveillance that caught it all. So there's a concern about this being a way to push surveillance in and show it as safety from things like insurrection.
Thank you, Tria.
I really appreciate that question or that observation, and I think it is really important that we be clear. We be clear about what happened to our country, so that we craft a response that actually is appropriate to preventing that from happening in the future. And so if we say, if we start to describe what happened as a riot or as some sort of non-specific rally, and we don't name that our country was attacked by white supremacists attempting to overthrow our government, that we need to be very specific about the motivation and the cause and how it was organized, so that we don't allow a sprawling sort of Patriot Act kind of response, right? Because it would be very easy for people who have long wanted some kind of new technology around any kind of rally or any kind of event or any kind of expression of that we differentiate between what happened, so that we don't want to recreate some of the things that happened in the moment of the Patriot Act and the moment of that post 9/11 kind of rush to increase surveillance and rush to that in retrospect didn't make a lot of sense for the kind of attack that we realistically and pragmatically needed to address. So I really appreciate that framing, and I do think that anytime you hear people really sort of crime in an amorphous and non-specific way, of terrorism in an amorphous and non-specific way, of rioting in a kind of non-specific way, I think it's making policy based on a clear set of principles and beliefs about how our society should function. And I think these principles.
So much, Steve. So I think for the next 20 minutes, we're going to jump into a little demo just to show you guys what happens when you take a still. Chris, I think you're going to do the demo for us.
Yes. Okay, let me start sharing the screen here. And I guess the first thing I wanted to do is, let me make sure, can folks. Minera, is everything visible here?
We could just see like a white page, but we can see the screen.
All right, cool. The first thing I wanted to do, I guess, is just show sign up for recognition. Recognition is the name of Amazon's thing. This Amazon Recognition said that they don't allow law enforcement to use their thing anymore. I'm not going to actually go through the process of signing up for one, but the fact that anyone can just create an AWS account and not give all of they don't have to and do what I did and give them some fake information, sort of puts lie to the fact, because anyone can set up an account and anyone can use their machine learning and use their facial recognition systems, just like police officers can. So I guess what I want to make sure that is clear to everyone on this call is that I'm going to be doing this on volunteers only. Minera, Fletcher, and if you're in the audience and you're curious about what will happen if I participate in this, you can the camera will flip to you, and I'll take a screenshot and I'll upload your face to this, and we'll see what happens. But if you don't want that to happen to you, it's not going to happen unless you give me your very explicit consent. Okay, so this is an example of what Amazon recognition looks like behind the scenes. And what this is this is Amazon's, their demo. So like, this is what they show you once you've signed up for it, and like they're demoing their services. So what I'm showing right now is face comparison. So let me upload a picture here. Let's see. CM Steve Fletcher. Yeah, let's try that. Or actually, no, let's try celebrity recognition. Let's see if it thinks you're a celebrity, Steve. Okay. I don't know who either of these people are. But it's 84% confident that you are this person. Can we is there a way for me to see a live thing of Steve's face, or so that we can do a comparison? Let's see here. Steve, could you talk for a bit for me?
Sure, yeah. I can tell you I am not Yehuda Green. I'm curious who that is. I actually don't know who that is myself.
Okay, well, I took your picture and let's do face comparison. So behind this is not, if this seems kind of clunky to you, this is because this is their demo. So here's, normally if you are doing this, it would be much more streamlined. Here we go. All right, so let's see if it recognizes this is Steve's sort of official picture, and yeah, it says that there's a 99.8% match there. So it does. It recognizes you, Steve. Let's try Manira. Do you want me to try it on you now?
Please go ahead.
Okay, all right, start talking. If you could talk for me for a little bit.
Yes, I will just keep talking and buffer while you take this picture. Unfortunately, I have nothing to say.
All right, I got it. Let's take here's your Facebook picture. Well, let's see. Well, first, let's see if it thinks that you're the same person as Steve there. So obviously, no, it doesn't think you're the same. But let's see if it recognizes you from that screenshot that I just took. 99% match. There we go. And let's do a facial analysis here. So this is actually pretty interesting. These are what it's doing here is it's just making some guesses about you based on the picture. So let's see what happens if we upload this one right now. Looks like a face, appears to be female, age range 19 to 31. Yeah, this all seems fairly accurate. Not wearing glasses. There we go. Let's see, Steve's picture. I'm not sure how we want to, if anyone from the crowd is interested in participating in this, but if you are, they'd be happy to do it. So yeah, this is kind of how things work behind the scenes. Let's see if it recognizes you as a celebrity, Manira. And what I kind of want to make clear here is that in a lot of ways, this is facial recognition at its best, because we have people who it doesn't recognize you as a celebrity. We have people who are in the center of the frame, fairly high resolution photos, and it's not crunching thousands of them all at the same time. And well, this is not a very scientific thing, but like if it seems like it's working most of the time, it's because facial recognition does work. Even if we saw in like the worst cases, like 79% is still does work most of the time. But it's in those edge cases where, and then you compound those, and then you compound the inaccuracy with the built-in biases in sort of law enforcement and who it's used on, and you get all sorts of problems. And I just want to actually really quick. So let's try and recreate Emun's experiment from before. because I want to show that. Okay, you can see that it's not detecting a gun here. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because with all machine learning and with all these kinds of systems, it's very, it depends on the data set that you feed it, and it depends a lot on stuff that isn't really knowable. It is a big opaque black box. And so, and I want to kind of harp on a point that Steve was talking about earlier. If it is very difficult to build up trust in law enforcement when people don't really understand how the tools that they're using are working. And I can say, as someone who's been tinkering with this for a while and who is, you know, I'm using Linux right now. I'm a huge nerd. I get paid to break into computer systems as a living. I don't really understand how machine learning works in the back end. If you showed me artificial intelligence code, I wouldn't know how to read it. And this stuff is really opaque, and it's hard to build up trust in law enforcement when they're using algorithms and they're using systems that are opaque and unknowable and have these kinds of biases that you can show. So yeah, I did want to sort of highlight that. Did we have any volunteers from the crowd who wanted to go through something like this? I wouldn't be surprised if there were none, but. Any raised hands?
Tria.
Tria? Okay. So to be clear, what I'm going to be doing here is I'll be taking a screenshot of your, I think that you have to give them Noble.
Yeah, go ahead, Tria. Okay, so what am I doing?
You get do you have your webcam turned on? I just see a black screen.
Oh, where is it? Oh, it should be on. Oh, shoot, maybe I'm not good. Why aren't I seeing webcam?
That's all right, Tria. It seems it's not working, and we kind of need the camera to actually do the demo. If there's anyone else, if not, we can just go back to the questions, because I do see more in the chat.
Oh, wait, I just saw video. Does that work?
You're not really in the frame.
Okay. There's not, all I'm seeing is, I'm not seeing myself either.
Okay, down a little bit.
That's good.
There we go, okay.
Oh, yeah, there I am, okay. What would you use as a reference?
Well, that's kind of up to you. Oop.
Stay still, Mom.
No, it's okay. I just had a blip on my end. I think I might have just overloaded my system's memory here, and it's now frozen.
Oh, so.
So let me do some debugging here. Noble, if you could.
I think, Chris, for the sake of time, I do want to get to just a few more questions as well as a wrap up. Thank you, Tria. We'll try to get that to you.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, let's jump back into it. I think there was one important question that kept coming up. It was a question on the Capitol protest and why facial recognition was so successful there, or if it was. I don't know if anyone here wants to speak to that really quickly. Elizabeth, Chris, Steve. I think it was the first big case of people seeing facial recognition in action. So I think there's a lot of curiosity about it, naturally.
I think we don't necessarily know enough yet about how it actually got used. It'll be interesting to sort of hear the debrief on that. But I think a couple of people have joked, but it's not entirely a joke that we know that facial recognition is more accurate for white men, and so it may actually have been a very sort of best case test for the technology in that regard, and that was mostly who was involved in insurrectionary activities. But so far, all the reports that have come out, I think the places that we're actually probably seeing facial recognition are people getting tagged on Facebook, where they're posting pictures of themselves or posting pictures of other people, and their sort of social networks that they've consented to are scanning their photos and identifying them, and then people who know them are reporting them. So that's a lot of the stories that we've heard. And I still think that people who actually know people who are involved seem to be a more important source of information from at least from the initial stories that have come out and from the news reports. But it'll be interesting to hear in the long run sort of what the analysis is once we're a little further away from it.
Thank you. It looks like there's also a question on how glasses, masks, and any other kind of similar items would affect facial recognition. Chris, I don't know if you want to speak to that about the trouble with facial recognition and then mask and all that kind of stuff. And
then masks, did you say?
Yeah, mask, glasses, anything that might impede the camera's vision. And how that facial recognition.
Yeah, so the basic way that facial recognition works is usually by identifying people, as Elizabeth said, by like mapping out key features such as the nose, the mouth, the ears, and then like doing machine learning and working off of those key frames. So, and if people are wearing glasses or masks or anything else, or even just if the cameras are elevated, as most surveillance cameras are, so that you've got like kind of a top-down view from where you only really see, things from an angle that most people don't take social media pictures on, like the sort of full face on. It just doesn't work as well. There just isn't enough details in most of those kinds of pictures for the algorithm to really get an anchor on that kind of data and make good analyses and make good comparisons. So if you have glasses, if you have a big beard, if you're wearing masks, or if you just have or if you just have things that the programmer who designed the system thinks are quote unquote abnormal, I read an interesting paper about how if you're ginger, and if you have lots of freckles and very pale skin, that there's a lot of cases where facial recognition doesn't work as well for you either. And so if there's something about your face that is different than what the programmers who fed the data into the algorithm expected, if you're an edge case, then it just won't work as well. And it's frustrating and scary to think that you might get arrested by law enforcement, or perhaps it might not be even arrested. It might just be things like be denied access to a public building, or have it impact your credit score, or any other ways that it can be misused or abused. And because whoever designed the program thought you were a rare case or an outlier.
Thank you, Chris. And
Manera, I just want to add that there is a process that the National Institute of Standards and Technology has where companies can invest in taking their facial recognition technology through this process to better train the models on face masks. But that has to be something that a company is willing to do. It has to be an investment that they make. So there is a process here that has started to start collecting data, facial features or images with masks that will help train a facial recognition system for that, and basically based on what Chris said, so that people need to get into a building, things such as that nature, that option is available for some companies.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Chris, I think you're still screen sharing. If you could end that, then we'll jump back to the regular view.
Well, I can leave.
All right, well, it looks like we have 8 minutes left. I don't see any other questions in the chat and no one's raising their hand. So I think we'll just jump to Council Member Fletcher to wrap us up and just remind everyone of the important notes as well as upcoming dates and things like that.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. This was a good discussion, and I hope it was useful to everybody who participated and everybody who might watch later. The next steps in this are a public hearing at our Policy Oversight and Government, or I always forget what this stands for. We just reorganized. The POGO committee is what we call it, whatever that stands for. But that is essentially our committee of the whole. So we'll be speaking to the entire council, and we're looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts. I know that people have a lot of questions about this. This is a new area of work for cities as this kind of technology emerges, and I think it's very important that we be having thoughtful and transparent discussions about it. So I'm really glad that people are tuning into this. I appreciate everybody who has raised concerns. I appreciate everybody who has pushed us to go even further. I think that we're landing in a good place for now because of a lot of really concerted effort from a lot of coalition partners and advocates and a lot of feedback from constituents, and that there will be a lot more technologies that we should put some defined limits around. So thank you, everybody, for your participation. We'd love to hear from you on is scheduled to take place on February 12th. Again, thanks everybody for participating. Thanks to the ACLU for your technical.
Lovely. Thank you again, everyone, and good night.
Thank you.